tall, but not that tall. Thank you, Marta, for that really kind introduction. Allow me to greet our hosts and authorities, Governor of the Province of West Flanders, Mayor of the City of Bruges, Madam Rector of the College of Europe, President of the Administrative Council, dear students, members of the faculty, prize sponsors, dear guests, greetings as well to those who are following us on streaming from other locations. First of all, congratulations. You made it. You're smiling. So I would say that you no more students, although when do we stop studying? But you are graduates from the College of Europe, so congratulations for that. You have my admiration, and I have to admit, a little bit of my envy. It truly gives me great pleasure to address you at this closing ceremony here in Bruges, a city that can rightfully claim to the title of the heart of Europe. Owing to the history and the prestige of this center of excellence in higher education, I consider this an opportunity and, of course, an enormous honor. Lying at the intersection of Europe's major trade routes, Bruges is a natural port and hub for transatlantic trade. It was home to the first stock exchange in Europe and saw the birth of very eminent and venerable guilds. Some of the most accomplished Flemish artists painted it. And I cannot fail to mention this, coming from Spain. Bruges became the adopted city of a very celebrated Spanish philosopher and humanist from Valencia, Juan Luis Vives. Indeed, it was likely here that he spent his happiest years, back in the 16th century. One can really feel so strongly the spirit of Europe in the streets, the squares, the canals of this city. So it is no surprise that the first Europeanists, when selecting the best location to place a center for advanced studies of Europe, chose this beautiful Flemish city in Belgium, following a generous offer from the authorities. Hence, this ambitious educational project took root and naturally flourished here to such an extent that one cannot fully understand European institutions and centers of thought without the College of Europe. It is so gratifying to see the Bruges campus being joined by others in Natolin, Poland, and Tirana, more recently in Albania, a very significant sign of a united Europe's spirit and vitality. I have come here to speak to you, bear with me, about Jacques Delors and the European project, something you know nothing about, do you? Probably you know much more than I do. In fact, the two subjects are almost one and the same. We all know that history is not written solely by one person, but in the case of your patron de promotion, separating the man from his work seems quite difficult, or even impossible, especially as we zoom into the decades of 1985 to 1995, when he was president of the Commission for 3 terms in a row, but also later in his career. It is quite true, obvious for most, that I am here speaking about Delors and Europe at a time of great geopolitical upheaval, a time in which multilateralism, Atlanticism, and the international rules-based order are suffering a great erosion, a time of threats to alliances that seemed unshakable, bonds that seem unbreakable, and stability that seemed unending. A time that recalled the words of Beethoven in the finals of his Ninth Symphony, which seemed to warn of the dangerous dissonance of history. I quote, "O friends, not these sounds. Let us strike up more pleasing and joyful ones." At times like these, when uncertainty takes over both present and future, it is helpful to look to the past and to the etymology of words, because the true meaning of names is often hidden in their roots. So, what is Europe, etymologically speaking? A word comprising of the adjective euris, wide, and the noun ops, gaze. So Europe is a place that sees clearly. Put another way, Europe is the place that sees far. The architects of the integration project were all Europeans with outstanding political vision. I am referring to Monnet, Schuman, De Gasperi, Spaak, and Adenauer. I am referring to my compatriot Salvador de Madariaga, who was so deeply involved in bringing this College of Europe into being, and who 75 years ago became president of its administrative council. All these public figures and many more, who for the sake of brevity I have not mentioned, were able to see union in Europe before it even existed. They understood before others that a future of peace, harmony, stability, and prosperity called for progressive sharing of sovereignty in certain areas, and for the establishment of a de facto interdependence that in turn would cultivate a feeling of community in the minds of all Europeans. This approach, widely known as the community approach, balances idealism with pragmatism. And what is politics if not a constant effort to strike a balance between the two? In this respect, we could safely state that the European journey has never followed a roadmap, but has always had a clear course, one that would meet the real pressing needs that over time widely arose for the people of Europe in times of turmoil. Some examples: the bipolarization of the world, the arms race, the decolonization process, the oil crisis, Soviet collapse, the rise of multipolar world, the economic and financial crisis, the global pandemic, and the emergence of digital networks and AI, to name just a few. Dear students of the College of Europe, dear graduates, Jacques Delors, your eminent patron de promotion, was one of those far-sighted Europeans. In his childhood and youth, he experienced the devastation of world wars. A man of strong social conscience and a multifaceted political career that ranged from unionism to city council to the government of France and the parliament in Strasbourg. Delors joined the Commission at a time when the European project, it can be said, had come to a standstill in 1985. And by the way, that year, now 40 years ago, was when Spain and Portugal signed the accession to the European communities then, and Delors was present at the signing at the Royal Palace on the 12th of June of that year. By the end of his third term, 10 years later, the internal market was firmly in place, social policies were also a growing reality, the foundations of an expansion to the east were set, and the member states were taking important initial steps towards an economic and monetary union. In his final years, although he had retired from politics, Delors retained a remarkable intellect and drive to the point of discussing matters such as Eurobonds and the digital revolution. In Spain, we recognized his enormous contributions to the European project twice, first with the Prince of Asturias Award for International Cooperation in 1989, jointly with Mikhail Gorbachev, and the second with the Charles V European Award from the European Academy of Justice Foundation in 1995. And by the way, I appreciated those historic references that bring us together a long time ago, through Charles V. So thank you for that family tie I mentioned. Now I would like to briefly mention his approach, Jacques Delors, because it says a great deal about him as a person. At a time of leaders with forceful personalities in various European countries, remember, well, you might not remember that well, but you've studied it, Kohl, Mitterrand, Thatcher, González, to name but a few. Delors was the epitome of leadership based on knowledge, effectiveness, and persuasion. He had an intuitive talent for identifying the end goal and determining the best way to reach it. Often in the European Councils, following the lengthy debate on any particular issue, heads of state and government would turn to the Commission and search for some orientation, asking, Jacques, how would you do this? How should we do this? And Delors would step up to the challenge and offer a detailed answer with several alternatives. Not out of vain impulsiveness, but from a serene and wise vision, following deep consideration, long hours thinking about Europe and for Europe. His closest colleagues, including his former chief of cabinet, Pascal Lamy, have said that Jacques Delors thought about Europe's present and its future. His strategic approach allowed him to keep the ship on course, profiting from fair winds and weathering adversity. As the Roman philosopher born in Cordoba, Seneca, said, for a man who knows not to which port he is sailing, no wind is favorable. Likewise, in the construction of Europe, always characterized then and now by stages and chapters that are often understood only in hindsight, knowing what is needed at each point and what the long-term goal is, and successfully balancing the two is key to success. Indeed, needs change. I believe we all think this way, but it seems natural to ask ourselves what the objective or goal really is. What is currently the ultimate aim behind the complex process of European construction? Some may argue that rather than tangible or realistic outcomes, it remains an ideal, an aspiration, a spirit of utopia. 170 years ago, Victor Hugo referred to this as the shared homeland in the mind of Europeans. It is never finished because there will always be room for improvement. However, we can safely say with hard proof and practical consequences that it already has a clear shape, a recognizable one, one we can define or describe easily in so many aspects of practical life, daily life, for all the citizens in the EU, one we have been building for 7 decades. That shared homeland of the people of Europe is a space with removed barriers and strengthened freedoms, where our children and grandchildren can grow and learn in an increasingly sophisticated environment of protected rights and accessible welfare. It is a framework of economic growth, social and territorial cohesion, which, if and when unpolluted by radicalism, perfects the concept of citizenship. It is also a growing area of our continent in which the common good reaches all Europeans and where all people, without exception, may feel part of a shared political space. A Europe of this nature cannot be inward-looking. We must necessarily look outward to the rest of the world. As a former High Representative for the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, your rector, here Federica Mogherini, knows well that a united Europe can never be cowardly, withdrawn, or self-obsessed. The Europe we want, the Europe we strive for, is one of solidarity and free thought, a Europe that never shies away from challenge, precisely because it knows from experience what doing so can lead to, We have tasted the bitterness and paid the price of inaction and indecision. Europe should always define itself by its commitment and by the high values and principles that lay within the legacy of these 70 years. Some may argue, we unfortunately often hear this even inside the EU, that our devotion to those principles and values is also our greatest weakness in this terra incognita of today's world, the eternal question between idealism versus realpolitik. As if on the global stage, the most powerful enjoy the greatest margin or leeway for inconsistency, for not honoring high values, and for using those beliefs as simple bargaining chips. In my view, the truth is quite the opposite of that cynical and acquiescent perception. In the end of the day, as Europeans, our values give us strength. Because in today's world, strength cannot be found in slogans, placards, or diatribes. Nor can we truly find it in the confusion between leadership and radicalism, in our blind faith in a technological future, or in the belief that complex problems have simple solutions. Strength, true strength, long-lasting and good-willing strength, comes from reason, from deep ethical thought, and the will to act accordingly. And Europe, the idea of Europe, is one of the greatest and wisest products of reason. Dear students of the Jacques Delors promotion, the next step of the European project, the one we continue to build, and this is not a contradiction, is defense and security. It is a field closely tied, though not always visibly, to the idea of Europe and its survival. This is inevitable for a project that was born from peace after two horrific world wars, but with a clear intention and aspiration of preventing war from ever taking hold on European soil again. This, of course, also ought to impregnate all our policies as much as possible. Why now? Why, we may ask ourselves, why is a project that began with the sharing of energy and raw materials, became a common market, adopted a currency, and laid the framework for a political union, is now looking to security and defense? I believe the answer is clear, because the erosion of the world order, the one we worked and hoped for and felt so close towards the turn of the century, of the millennium, has set off the alarm bells ringing. Furthermore, the world we have been living in, the world of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UN Charter, multilateralism, and the peaceful settlements of disputes, neither perfect nor free of conflicts and suffering, as we know, is being increasingly undermined and called into question by some of its greatest proponents and early defendants. In this climate of uncertainty and complexity, many conflicts, both old and recent, are not receiving the attention they deserve, including lawless fighting in many nations of sub-Saharan Africa. Other conflicts fill the headlines every day with news of bloodshed, carnage, and destruction. And here I am thinking of the Middle East, where a brutal war is devastating Palestine in the wake of no less brutal attacks against Israel, disregarding the fundamental rules of humanitarian law, or the latest worrying escalation of hostilities between Israel and Iran. But I'm also thinking of our own region, on our very border or doorstep, where Ukraine suffers a war of aggression and invasion, raging now for 3 years, that has brought a huge tragedy, mainly upon the Ukrainian people, probably not seen since the Continental Wars. Ukrainian people must not be abandoned. We must never abandon them. As we can clearly see, war has beset a cloud of doubt and sense of insecurity upon everything we knew or thought we knew about international law. Such basic principles as the respect for sovereign independence and territorial integrity of states are widely being debased. These are not mere legal concepts with no connection to our lives. They are the bedrock of our world and our way of life. They are the foundations on which we built the rule of law and which allow us to educate our children, to trade, to travel, pursue our life goals, or even cooperate to solve problems and global issues or needs. All those huge problems we all have in the back of our minds. The rules of the game are under threat. The benefits of diplomacy and honest cooperation are at risk. And what is at stake is our very way of life. Therefore, strengthening security and defense capabilities has shifted from a relevant but limited area of cooperation to a real and pressing need, with a large margin of improvement and huge potential. We must not forget that Europe justifies its existence by responding effectively to the needs that emerge in each stage. We, the people of Europe, must work together to meet those needs, to take this step forward without undermining other essential policies. On so many occasions in the past, the European project overcame crises that I would go so far as to call existential. I trust we can do so again, responding with more Europe, and that we will demonstrate this as many times as required. Let no one underestimate our ability as Europeans to confront the challenges ahead. However, dear students of the Collège d'Europe here in Bruges, the path ahead will not be easy, because if we are to make progress, the community approach I mentioned earlier is not enough on its own. Jacques Delors himself, he who had such a good understanding of the core elements of the European project, concluded that to forge a political union based on the intergovernmental pillars, inertias and dirigism do not work in the same way as they do when building an internal market. We need more than that, a deeper feeling of ownership, a stronger commitment from the people of Europe under a shared sense of identity. The true key challenge of building a stronger, long-lasting security and defense capacity or capabilities is that we must found it on European citizenship. The time for European citizens is now. Time to comprehend that the Union is not a community solely of rights and freedoms, but also of commitments and duties. We must ask ourselves not what Europe can do for us, this might ring some people in their minds, but what we Europeans of the 21st century can do for Europe. You may all recall Kennedy's words. Because our commitment to Europe, to the concept of Europe, is a commitment to our freedom, equality, and future, it will require much effort, even sacrifice, as is inescapable when so much is at stake. In our modern world, so deeply interconnected, no country or organization can aspire to be truly autonomous, nor would it be clearly beneficial. Europe is no exception. What we can aspire to and should aim at is to increase our sway and speak with a more effective and recognizable voice. We can only achieve this if we as Europeans continue to make our valuable contributions to collective security and to equip ourselves with the means to uphold and defend the principles we believe should continue to govern the international order and peace among nations. The combined resources and armed forces of the member states have enormous potential. Their prestige is indisputable. However, much progress needs to be made in aligning resources, planning capacity, command structures, and defense industries. We cannot begin to strengthen our defensive muscle. It would be senseless to do so without considering our alliances, and particularly our North Atlantic Alliance, NATO, on which security in Europe so largely depends. Because the transatlantic bond, our flagship strategic framework, is not just a political choice determined by chance. It is a way of understanding our place in the world, a values-based community forged in the tumultuous years of the 20th century, which is more vital than ever now at this point in the 21st century. We must not forget that ours is an alliance of democratic states. That is why we all participate in the transatlantic dialogue. Institutions, businesses, universities, artists, creators, and civil society at large. Therefore, I urge you, over the course of your careers, to continue nurturing that dialogue. I urge you to continue believing in it. In short, dear friends, never before in history has a united, strong, and cohesive Europe been so vital for the world and for ourselves. Just a few days from now, when you all leave back home or wherever your lives take you, when you leave the College of Europe, when you depart your friends, your experiences, with your diploma under your arm. As distinguished alumni of Bruges, of the Colegio de Europa, the beautiful task of continuing to build Europe will be yours. It will be your time to shape Europe. Use it well. Do not let skepticism defeat or dampen your eagerness to improve, to advance, to perfect the European project. Each stone, each brick you add to this construction will honor the memory of all the Europeans whose vision allowed them to see far. Europeans such as Jacques Delors, your illustrious patron, whose assertion that Europe is its people rings more true today than ever before. The European Union project is undoubtedly imperfect, like all things human, but it is a beautiful idea because its most fundamental aim represents a quest for harmony, a quiet harmony which often goes unnoticed below the deafening roar of the world we live in. I am sure that Beethoven, another European who dreamt of and believed in a united Europe without even having lived it himself, in the face of this European project of our time, would cry out, "Yes, friends, these sounds, these are the right sounds." Thank you all very much. Again, congratulations. Have a great Friday. And lots of luck in your lives. I am sure you will be successful and you will make this time here in the Colegio de Europa highly valuable for your careers. Good luck. All the best. Take care.